Well, hey, friends, and welcome back to the Early Childhood Chats podcast. Andy Roszak with you as always. And today we've got Alan Guttman joining us. We're going to talk about a topic that, quite honestly, we don't really talk about that much, but it definitely merits some time and attention, and that is mandatory reporting requirements. What is it? What's it mean? What does it actually look like in practice at your early childhood program? So I am very fortunate to be joined by one of the experts in this field. Alan has traveled around the country. He's an expert on the topic, has advised and helped folks put different plans in place, policies, laws, procedures, and is truly a wonderful individual. So Alan, thank you so much for being with us today. Please, I know I didn't do your introduction justice. Tell folks a little bit about yourself and how you got into this space.
Well, thanks for Andy for having me here and for the kind words, the introduction. A little bit about me. I'm doing consulting now, but that's after a 40-year career as an early childhood teacher who was, in that role, a mandated reporter, but then also became an education specialist. So then I was supporting programs and then also Head Start director and a school district child development director. And finally, last point of my career was with Johns Hopkins University, the School of Education, and we were supporting quality programming for the state of Maryland Department of Education. But my experience in child abuse reporting, besides my own role and how I was trained, the source for me wanting to go out and teach others and train others and actually support others came out of visiting a program in the far eastern part of the state of California while I was working for the Riverside County Office of Education. And it was my responsibility to monitor program, education, safety, the environment, and came across a situation where I was concerned about what I saw with a child in the classroom. And I went to speak to someone who would be the designated responsible person for filing the report. And there was a written report, but it was in the top drawer of their desk and it hadn't been reported. So that's the source of this training, was to help that program basically follow through on the law. So mandated reporting, it's not a preference. It's not a discretionary thing. It's very clear that for mandated reporters, it's only when you suspect abuse. So mandated reporters doesn't need to be an investigator, doesn't need to prove anything. All a mandated reporter needs to do is suspect that there's some abuse. However, the minute you suspect abuse, you actually then have to comply with the law. You can't, like if Alan Guttman right now, someone comes to me, a child comes to me, or I see a bruise on a child, if I suspect that there's abuse, I can't just erase that from my head and say, I don't suspect anything. And the minute I do have that suspicion, I'm now required by the law to file a report. So it's not my discretion. I don't have that discretion.
It's interesting back, almost 30 years ago now, when I started off as a firefighter and EMT and all that, we're mandatory reporters too. But for us, it was a lot easier because, quite frankly, Alan, the police came with us to a lot of calls, especially if they were domestic in nature. So as far as the mandatory reporting, if you're a paramedic or whatever, it's a lot easier because you've got those law enforcement resources usually on the scene with you. Early childhood doesn't have that luxury. And a lot of times, there can be things that, again, you're trying to put a lot of pieces together. Maybe a child says something, or you notice a child's behavior, or something just seems a little off. And I think you're right. That whole, do I have enough? Do I need to investigate? What's the trigger here that actually prompts the report can sometimes be a little bit confusing, because not all of these are, obviously if a kid comes in head to toe in bruises, that's pretty darn clear cut. But most of these situations aren't quite that. There's somewhere kind of in the middle here, or even less evidential, I guess, if you were to say a term.
So I think this is a great time that you brought in, those questions, those ideas, because what we're doing today, this would not be considered a mandated reporter training. So I want to be clear on that. I'm not going to give everyone the specific guideline that you have to have. And in addition to that, While every state and even the federal government and American Indian tribes all have their own individual child abuse reporting laws, you need to check with your state where you're working to see what the specific laws are. And also, I don't know what the exact mechanism is, but generally, law enforcement or communities have put in place either designated trainers from law enforcement, or they have maybe the city's contract with organizations that provide child abuse training so that you will know some of the symptoms to look for. You will know some of the behaviors to be mindful of with young children. You will know what might be neglect versus what might just be just a situation where there may be poverty that's impinging on the family's ability, but there's a borderline there. Even when poverty is impacting a child, we need to be careful that the child is not being neglected, so that, if they're going out in 2 degrees without a coat on, and if poverty is one of the reasons involved, yes, we can get involved with trying to support that family, or we should try to, put that family in touch with the services to make sure that the child is not going to be neglected. It's when the pattern continues, when we've gotten them the resources and we see a child that's possibly being neglected, then we take on that role. However, again, I'm not going to go through all the possible examples or symptoms of child abuse today. What I really want to focus on is the why of reporting, not so much the how of reporting, a little bit of that, but also, and this is where it's sort of, to me, crucial for administrators and even for mandated reporters themselves to understand the reasons why some may be hesitant. And I'll just say, may be hesitant to follow the law. So someone may be thinking, I'm going to make a better decision than the law. That's not what the law says. So basically, I like to try to get at what's going to sometimes keep people from filing that report that they know they're mandated required to do. So that's kind of going to be a little bit of my focus here today, if not the prime focus.
So I guess when you think about times when we don't file the report, I guess there's a few kind of buckets that it would fall in. Either we don't know that it qualifies, or we're not sure. We don't know maybe how abuse can be defined. And certainly, as you mentioned, all 50 states have reporting requirements. This is law in all 50 states. All 50 states also use a little bit different verbiage in their laws. So check your local laws and figure out exactly how this applies to you. But I would think there's a little confusion about that. Or as you're kind of mentioning here, there may be just some fear of retaliation, or like I did something wrong and now the family's upset with me, or they're going to come after me, or I got somebody in trouble, or whatever have you. Is that kind of fair to kind of clump in those buckets and say these are some of the reasons people fail to report?
So what I think I'm going to do is take one step back, and then you'll remind me to come forward to
Okay.
those reasons. But the step back is just to quickly go through why we report. Okay. So we know there's a law. And in a lot of places where mandated reporters work, there's also workplace requirements. So if you're in a job or a facility, so you would think, oh, like the janitor in a school building. Well, are they mandated? Yes, they're mandated because they're working in a school building. So that's part of it, is that it's mandated for teachers and for professions working directly with children, but also in those that are working in the facilities. So that's a big part of workplace. When you sign, a lot of workplaces where there are children and you're mandated to report, a lot of workplaces will have, as part of your onboarding, they will have either a mini training within the organization that gives their procedures and how that organization reports mandated suspected child abuse. And then you'll have to sign that. There'll be an agreement that's part of your employment, that you understand that that's part of your employee role for the organization working with children. However, from, you know, just sort of, each of our hearts and each of our reasons for going into the field, the main reason that we report child abuse is to protect children, to be that voice for the children, especially you're working with children birth to 5 years old, and this applies, children up through 18 years old. But when we're working with birth to 5, some of those children don't have the words. Some of those children are afraid of adults. Some of those children may be threatened by adults. So I say the main reason why we always report when we suspect that a child is being abused is to protect that child, because somewhere else in that child's life, they're not being protected. Someone's not protecting them. And even worse, someone may be abusing them. So now back to the piece with why do people sometimes feel, well, I don't want to report. Okay. And I think in this one example that I described where I was in California, one of the biggest reasons why I suspect the report did not happen was because this was a very small, tight-knit community, and the people working in that program were afraid that if they reported on their child that there was suspicion of abuse, that someone would come to that school, someone would come to that childcare center and either threaten or commit some kind of violence against the school or the person that they thought reported their child was being abused. So that fear piece, and that fear piece can take some very sometimes very unique sometimes there's very unique types of fear. And I'll give you an example. One of my earliest jobs in Santa Monica, California, and I was directing a small little center, a director from a private school came over to talk to me. We had met each other in professional circles. She came over to me, and the child that she was suspicious was being abused was the grandchild of the center director. Oh. So now you've got a situation where an employee is concerned that if they report suspected child abuse, something may happen to them. So again, this is, and I'm not going to give every procedure to put in place, but this is for administrators, people that run programs, to be mindful, to have procedures in place to make sure that all staff feel protected, supported, and maybe that there are also mechanisms to make the reporting anonymous. Generally, when you work in a program, and in some states, I'll give an example, right here in Virginia, in the regulation, it says if you can report it by yourself, but you also, if you're in an organization, you report it to the designated person in your organization. Now, again, that example that I just gave, that could be a challenge in Virginia, So again, it may be to designate then someone that's sort of, or several people, in an organization, so that if there's a conflict with going to one person for support because they may know the family of the child you're suspecting is being abused, you have an option then to maybe talk to someone else in the organization. And if you'd like, I can touch on some of the uniqueness there in that Virginia law that I just mentioned, if you want.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to kind of tease some of this stuff out and give some real examples. So if you'd like, I know you've been intimately involved in a lot of this crafting, so certainly brag a bit if you'd like.
So I think that was a question. The Department of Ed in Virginia, they asked me to sit in on a meeting when they're looking at maybe reconsidering some of the policies within the state of Virginia. But this was with officials from the Department of Ed who work closely with Department of Social Services on this. However, that piece in the Virginia law that says if you report it to a supervisor in your organization, you fulfilled your responsibility, okay, as a mandated reporter. Now, when I worked in California, and if you go to California, It's an individual reporting responsibility. You suspect the abuse, you report the suspected abuse. You can't put it on to someone else in your organization. You can't say, and I'll give you the worst case scenario of this, not at an early childhood level, but at the college level. The most famous case of this was at Penn State University, where there was an assistant coach, saw that it looked like there were some athletes being abused in the locker room by one of the coaches. And that person followed Pennsylvania law. They went to their supervisor, whoever was the coach of the team, the head coach of the team. They went to that coach. Okay. So they fulfilled their reporting role. Okay. That person then went to Joe Paterno because that was the supervisor for that coach. And that coach reported to Joe Paterno. Joe Paterno then went to the director of athletics for Penn State. So each person is going up and following the procedure of reporting to their supervisor. Meanwhile, the abuse is still happening. No one has notified law enforcement, but everyone involved is, quote, following the mandate and following the procedures. And at some point, when it got to the highest level in Penn State, that person didn't report it. There was just whatever politics were involved there, and I won't get into that. But to me, the focus is on when you've got a procedure in the law, which Virginia has right now, which you go up to a supervisor, it then can be, people could sort of keep pushing that up. Potentially, there's the risk that could happen. Now, in Virginia, there's also written in the law that the person, if I went to my center director, if that's the designated person, and I did my reporting, which is required by Virginia, it says that the person that I report to either has to come back to me and tell me when they filed the report, who they reported to, or I can go back to my supervisor and say, well, did you file that suspicion of abuse that I reported to you? So again, I think the more intermediary steps that you put in there, you risk something falling through the cracks or someone saying they did something, but they don't really know if it's actually done until someone comes back and tells them. And again, that's Virginia. Other states may again be like California, where it's an individual responsibility. And I think Virginia is also like Maryland, and many states are like this. While in our field, in early childhood education, we're mandated in Virginia and in Maryland, and I know in other states as well, anyone can report suspected child abuse. Okay? Generally, the difference between mandated reporter and anybody in the state doing it is that generally, when you're mandated, you have to give your identity so that people can come back to you and sort of follow up with you if they have questions. However, I think in Virginia and in Maryland, members of the public can report anonymously. And I think even in some of the states, mandated reporters can report anonymously. So again, it's sort of trying to find this balance between protection for the reporting person, but also making sure that, the state, whoever the official is, when they do their investigation, they can try to speak to the person that the report, was filed by.
Well, you bring up a lot of good points. And of course, any system that's got multiple kind of links in the chain brings up potential failure and delay and just other stuff, right? So, I mean, clearly, if you're at that point and you do have suspicion, our first priority is the safety of those children. And, we want to make sure that the report gets filed in a timely manner. Have you seen that a lot, where some of these reports kind of just get delayed, punted, kicked down the road on somebody's desk for a while, no action is taken, and then, weeks go by and nothing's really even done?
So I'm going to say, if my career in education is back into the mid 80s and early 90s, I'm going to say this was more likely to happen in the past. Okay. I think more and more states went to this individual responsibility. However, I didn't touch on this discretionary piece where, so one of the pieces is fear, and that's why people may not report. This other piece is discretionary, where a mandated reporter, someone they have suspicion of abuse, they might almost be definitely sure that there's abuse going on. Um, and yet they still think, you know what? I don't want to interfere with this family. I don't want to
Mm.
disturb, this child's life. What happens? Are they going to take the child away from the home? Am I going to disrupt this child's life? Am I going to disrupt this family's life?
Yeah.
So people then, that the law doesn't tell you to use that kind of discretion. The law says, hey, you're suspicious of abuse. We're the only ones that can investigate this and find out what's going on. And then we as a state, we make a determination as to what goes on. And I think also the system in responding has also become a little bit more sensitive in how it responds. It just doesn't come in and grab a child.
Yeah.
Generally, it's going to talk to family. It's going to talk to the child if the child can articulate. It may talk to others in the child's life to sort of see what's going on. Not only that, it's going to make sure that the suspected abuse is actually substantiated abuse. So that's a specific term in the field. So cases of abuse will either be substantiated or they will be unsubstantiated. But mandated reporters, that's never a determination that we make. All we have is suspicion. And as long as our suspicion of abuse is not malicious, like we're not doing this to get the family in trouble, to get back at a family that's done something or said something, as long as we have genuine suspicion of abuse, reasonable suspicion is the term used in most of the laws. As long as I have reasonable suspicion that a child is being abused, then the law says I have to report. But again, all of these other factors come in. Am I going to get the school in trouble? Is this going to bring, look what happened to Penn State. Yeah, that ended up hurting their image. Not so much because that there was abuse going on. It turned out, yeah, there was abuse going on, but there was worse than the abuse was the cover up that they didn't report this and that they allowed the abuse to continue happening. So again, it really makes it more important for the organization that you follow the law, that you follow the procedures.
So I want to chat a little bit about kind of the reporting, like once you make the report, kind of what goes on. And I know we're going to have to be kind of general because look, every city, county, state, they've all got different resources. In many cases, it's different agencies that actually receive the report, all that kind of stuff. But like on a general conversation here, what entity is normally receiving these complaints? And then what are kind of some of the next steps that generally you'll see once a complaint or a suspicion has been filed?
So I'll try to give you the range here. And again, states and even individual jurisdictions, cities, towns may, follow up in different ways. But I'll give you sort of the broadly how it looks and also broadly what the laws generally require. So in California, and I think similar in many other states, when the minute I suspect abuse, a child comes up to me. I had this happen. I was on a federal review of a program, and the child sat next to me on the bus. I was assigned to sort of, monitor the safety on the bus, which I was saying, okay, I'll go on a ride. I'll be with the kids. I'll monitor the safety of the bus ride. But this is what I call the child putting on my mandated reporting hat, because child gets on the bus. And I am mandated even as a federal reviewer at the time, but still, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking at other compliance with bus transportation requirements. Child gets on the bus, and I was assigned to the seat next to this child. Child gets on, he's got this huge black eye, and he says, "My dad got me." I asked him, "What happened?" He said, "Oh, my dad got me." And, so for me, I don't need to ask questions of that child. I don't need to investigate. And this is as simple as this was. I mean, granted, I didn't work in this program, but when the bus came in, I went back and I sat down with the social services coordinator, and we both made the call together. So here's what I was getting to when I just said we both made the call together. As soon as you suspect abuse, as soon as possible, in most states, you're required to make an oral report by phone. Some states, even Virginia now, has an online reporting portal. But I still think you have to make that oral report as soon as you can. Usually they say as soon as you can, as soon as possible, but not more than 24 hours after you suspect abuse. That's most of the cases. And then after that, usually you have about 36 hours. And again, giving you California example, but I think similar types of timelines in other states as well, where you have 36 hours to file an official written report. It's usually an official state form. It's got a form number in the corner, and it tells you this is everything you have to do. And generally, you're giving as much information to them as you can. They're going to want to know the name of the child, gender, date of birth, address, and if you have suspicion or you have an idea of who may have been abusing the child, you include that information on the written report. You're going to actually have given this all orally beforehand. But again, because this is a required, report by the law, it actually helps you and the state that you've got yourself, on the record for filing a mandated report, for making the oral report. Because, and this is sort of a quote that I hear in the back of my head from a video clip that I've used in my training. Okay, but you can't, if you report and you had genuine suspicion, the law protects you. If there's any kind of, the parents argue it, if there's any kind of a case comes out of this, as long as you were following the law, you had genuine suspicion, you were not doing it maliciously, you're protected by the law. If you suspected abuse, and you don't report, you may be liable. So again, you are subject to this law. That's what the mandate is. If there was no consequence for just letting it, do its thing, I decided not to report this one, everything will be fine. Or, all right, if the child gets hurt, that's not my fault. I just felt like no, the mandate says if you suspect that a child is being abused, that if you don't report it, there could be a consequence for you. So that's part of the connecting the dots and protecting the child's system.
Well, and I think we kind of de facto, when we talk about this topic, we automatically go to the parents. But this mandated report requirement is way broader than just parents, right? This is your coworkers. This is others in the child's life. This is really every kind of abuse, right?
So I just want to clarify. What are you meaning about the parents? Just clarify what you're.
Well, I think when we heard the term mandatory reporter, you kind of just naturally clicks like, oh, mom or dad is doing something bad to the kid at home. But I see so many news stories where a coworker, a fellow teacher in a different classroom is being abusive to kids. And I've seen a lot recently, which have been disturbing, that this has seemingly went on for weeks and weeks and weeks and nobody reported it. So I'm saying the duty to report doesn't just include the parents. It really includes all types of abuse from all sorts of people.
Right. When you look at the mandated reporting law, and I haven't seen every state's, right. But I have not seen in any mandated reporting law any mention of a description of who the abusers can be. Right. The laws don't talk about that because technically anyone can be an abuser or a suspected abuser of children. However, this is the sad part, Andy. In the research that I've looked at and the research that I use in my trainings, 90% of child abuse happens at the hands of parents or at the hands of someone that the child knows. So all of the stranger danger stuff and the stranger training and protect our child from strangers, yes, those cases happen, but it's really more of the familiar, the family danger that is there when it comes to suspecting child abuse. And again, I don't, look, if a child verbalizes something to me like that child on the bus, my dad got me, I'm going to put that information on my report. And when I call it in, I'm going to include that.
Right.
But there have been many other mandated reporting cases where I've suspected abuse. I don't ask the child, who did that to you? That's the beginning of investigation. That's the beginning of putting words in a child's mouth that's not actually good. When you suspect abuse, let the investigators do their job. All your job is reporting. So, yeah.
So, Alan, I'm wondering, like, at some point, if you think about kind of the scale, the spectrum, if you will, of kind of abuse that's out there, right? And first off, nobody wants to see anybody get abused. So, we're all on the same page with that, obviously. But there's a distinct difference of kind of like, hey, something's off, something's going on at the house that is uncomfortable or not up to par, or I've got feelings about, or however you want to contextualize it, versus like there is an immediate threat to life and safety. And I feel like if I send this kid home right now, bad things are going to happen. And I recognize that, the mandatory reporting requirements don't go away, but in many cases, if you submit that report, again, it's very contingent on the resources of the county or the city or the state or whoever is in charge with the investigation. There can be a time delay. So what do you tell the folks that say, like, gosh, this kid came in this morning, he's, black and blue all over. He's afraid to go home. He's been in panic mode all day in my classroom. I literally can't send this kid home. I filed my report, but that's not enough. I need some help here. How do we handle those kind of cases? It seems to me the call to 911 is probably appropriate in those cases, right?
So I want to answer your question, and then I'm going to remind myself, I want to go back to that place of, in terms of, we don't want to hope that, we don't want to think there's abuse all the time in that kind of area. So sadly, I have too many examples, and the one that sticks out for me that fits, perfectly with your question, when I was teaching kindergarten in the Los Angeles School District, girl take me to my classroom, and I forget why I checked, or maybe someone had said something, maybe my assistant teacher had said something, but I then was looking at the back of this is a 5-year-old, and she had multiple cigarette burns on her back. That was the shape, in various degrees of healing, so you knew there were old burns. You knew it was continuing. You saw new burns. So that was a case where the call was to 911. And police did come, and they came. They had like a stuffed animal for the girl, and the police took the child. And I think the police then also, they do the notification with the parent. We didn't, and this is that gray area I think you would also ask about, with what happens when it goes to places. I didn't answer the end of that, which is that sometimes we never hear what happens in an investigation. And for reporters, sometimes you're just going to have to understand. And actually, I had an official in charge. I was presenting at a conference in Nashville, and the county official who was responsible for the department that handled child abuse reporting, she says, just like mandated reporters have requirements, we have requirements as well. And we have laws and regulations that we have to follow, so that we can't give out every piece of information. We can't tell you how an investigation is going. And again, that may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but as a mandated reporter, you can't always expect, that you're going to find out what happened to this child. I mean, in this case, I can't, now this is too long ago for me to recall. I can't recall. I am pretty sure that girl came back to our classroom, but I'm not 100% positive. And there could have been time in between. I'm really not sure about that. But there are other cases where, there are some urgent cases where the child, it's sort of a gray area. We had one child, she said she got burnt on a radiator. But, Andy, it's really hard when you look down at a child's leg and it's the exact shape or that was one of them. Curling iron, I think I was told. But that's hard when you look down at the child's leg and it's the shape of a clothes iron. It's a very specific shape.
Yeah.
Every clothes iron you've ever seen. So to see that shape on a child's thigh, and then parent, after we had done the report, parent's explanation of, oh, it was on the bed and my child accidentally rolled into it. Again, we have to go to that reasonable place. Like, what's reasonable? But in that case, I think we did the report to social services. Social services investigated. It was clearly a new injury, but I think, again, I don't make the decision. We reported it. We didn't report it to the police, but social services, I think, actually came out to the school the same day. Wow. But going back to, and this to me is sort of, it's not the broken part of the system, but it's just something I don't think we do as well as we need to, which is that if we know that 90% of abuse is from a family member, parents, someone the child knows closely, where's parenting education in our nation? Where's parenting education in school districts? I've always thought that at minimum, senior year of high school, there's some kind of mandatory parenting training, mandatory child development training. And also, you've got it, I would say, senior year of high school, so that people are not complaining, why are we teaching, high schoolers about being parents? This is, this is against our beliefs or something. To me, at minimum, senior year. And then also freshman year, if you go into college, freshman year of college, also like a mandatory parenting 101 class. Because the reality is, who did we learn to parent from? We learned to parent from our parents,
right,
who learned to parent from their parents. And parenting, throughout history, different disciplinary practices, stricter disciplinary practices, this has sort of been carried forward. So without this education piece for parents, there's a cycle there. I know it within myself. I got hit when I was a child. And so I know that within myself, that cycle is there. And it's very scary for me it's inside of me. I know it's inside of me. So I think that's a piece that needs to be sort of part of the discussion, with child abuse, not necessarily the reporting piece. The reporting piece, it's law. Okay. This parenting piece, I think, should be part of our education world.
Well, it makes sense in trying to kind of tackle the root cause of some of these issues. And you think about, gosh, when I was in high school, we had driver's ed, we had home ec, we had shop, we had a lot of good stuff that really kind of set you up for success later in life, quite frankly.
Sorry, I'm trying to turn off my phone.
Sorry I mean, I don't really know what the curriculums are like in high school now, and I'm guessing it probably varies depending on where you're at in the country. But, certainly those foundational skills can come in handy and help kind of correct that cycle, because you're right, there is no manual for parenting, and you kind of practice what you've experienced or what you've kind of learned from your parents. So it does get you in a vicious cycle in some cases.
And I want to say I was fortunate when I worked in Santa Monica, and we had some cases of abuse that we had to report. Either I reported or one of the teachers that in the center that I was directing had a report. But we were fortunate. We got a state grant, and we actually had like a 15-week, 15-unit, granted it was voluntary, but for parents to come in the evening and have a parenting program. And the parenting program was specifically around alternatives to, physical discipline. Yeah. So it really had a focus on, how do we give parents, what options can we give parents? At minimum, if we can't give them a full child development, parenting, early childhood educator training, what skills, strategies, and tools can we give them to give them alternatives to just physical punishment?
So I'm thinking about kind of how the landscape has changed over the last, 5 or 10 years. And now, I mean, you're seeing half the states have legalized marijuana. Obviously, we've always had problems with, alcohol. Are some of the states starting to try to address some of these new and emerging issues about, how does the marijuana, how does the illegal drugs, how does the fentanyl, how does that play into mandatory reporting? Or do you think the current structures kind of captures it good enough?
So, Andy, you have me here. I'm ignorant in this area. So I really do not.
Okay.
I haven't seen any research. I don't know, if X person is more likely than Y person. But maybe this is the time to say that in terms of child abuse, there's no specific demographic that is more likely. Okay, child abuse, suspicion of child abuse cuts across every demographic: rich, wealthy, poor, impoverished, suburban, urban, all across all racial categories. There's no, oh, it's predominantly this demographic group. That is not the case. Okay. When it comes to children being abused, it cuts across all of the demographics. And so, I'm not answering your question, but I'm going to say, yeah, it probably applies to people who abuse alcohol or overuse drugs, but again, I would imagine it just fits in with that across the board demographic, in terms of
Yeah.
it's likely for any group, any demographic.
Well, and I know some of the programs have struggled with that. I mean, obviously, if you got a parent that comes to pick up your kid at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon and they're drunk as a skunk, you're not going to let that child go, I hope, with that parent. Now that, marijuana has been legalized in so many places, we're seeing some parents come up high as a kite, and the concerns are still valid. Like, I don't want the kid being released to someone who's high and impaired and driving away and getting into an accident and getting hurt or killed,
So,
right? So,
that is, when you give me that specific example, of course, it brings back a couple of memories, but those are very difficult situations. And we had a case where, and this was when I was the director for the school district in California of the child development program. Parent hadn't picked up their child. The program was closing, end of the day, still hadn't heard from the child. Finally, when I reached the child, parent slurring their words, and so was upset, that this is not, we're not going to, number one, we're not going to hold the child here and hold staff here forever, number one. Number two, I'm not going to be comfortable making an assessment of whether this child, should go home with the parent in whatever state they're in. I'm not an expert on what's considered, not competent enough to drive, or that's not my expertise. That's a case where we had the child, we dropped them off at the police station in the community, told the parent, this is where your child is, that's where you need to go pick them up. And again, if you wanted to stereotype and say, oh, I would, and this is kind of what you hear in the news stories, I would have never thought that parent was a parent who could do that. Or I never, again, same school district, we had a whole range of a wealthy community in that district on the north side of the tracks, a not as wealthy community on the south side of the tracks. And we had someone, quote, in the north side of the community, hitting their child with a hairbrush on the head, again, anything that you could think, I would never think that person would do that, any demographic, so it's always, but we don't make the judgments. We just say that child says they're getting hit on the head with a hairbrush. We can see some marks on their head. That's the end of my investigation.
Okay. Well, I know you travel around the country, talking about this issue, training on the issue. What are some of the kind of the frequently asked questions that your attendees come up with? I'm sure you get kind of the same series of questions or same themes kind of time and time again. What are some of those real big pieces that people really struggle with when it comes to mandated reporting?
I'd say the biggest one is that, when we're teachers of young children, we work very closely with families. We work very closely with parents, and staff do not kind of want to betray this relationship that they have with the family. They've built this trusting relationship. The family, the parents trust them. They're trusting their child, with adults at a facility that's not home for 6 hours, 8 hours, even for childcare, could be 10 to 12 hours a day. So when a staff person suspects abuse, they really feel like, they don't want to violate the trust. And again, going towards that, we had the fear piece. We had people discretionary wanting to make their own decisions on things. But there's this other piece with not wanting to jeopardize the relationship, and not wanting to lose this child from the program to keep the child in the program. So this is kind of, and I think in every program that I've been in as an administrator, number one, I've done this little piece of training that I'll share here. But it's also something that for every staff person, this has come up, this relationship and feeling uncomfortable having to file a report. And here's the procedure. There's two things when a staff person is confronted by a parent or by a relative of the child. Number one, no one likes lying. So they don't want to lie. If someone accuses them of something that they've actually done, they don't want to lie. So that puts them in a difficult position. I'm just doing my mandated following the law. So what I say is that you have procedures in place. The parents get those procedures when they enroll their child in the program. They sign a book, a handbook. In that handbook says, we are all mandated reporters in this program. This is what the law requires from us. Okay? Whenever we report, just so you know, we don't disclose to anybody who has done the reporting. We don't disclose if it's come from us because it may not have come from our school. But if ever we're confronted by parents, we don't share that information. And so that's the mantra. And I've had staff role play this. So if we started our program in September, in August, before school, we had 2 weeks of training. One of those trainings days, we had staff playing the role of a confrontational parent and staff playing the teacher that reported suspected child abuse and getting in their face. And the standard reply, that the only reply they're supposed to give is that we can't share that information, so that they don't have to lie. I know you reported on my child. I know. Tell me, did you report on my child? I'm sorry, we don't share that information. Remember, it was in the handbook. We're not allowed to share that information. And then the second piece, because it takes the pressure off a teacher or an assistant teacher or a janitor, if you have any questions, talk to our director. So it channels the parent or who's ever confronting a teacher about a suspected abuse report. It channels them to the director. So to me, it's the main way to support, staff people to feel like I've got this answer. I don't have to lie to them. Yeah, I'm not answering their question the way they want it answered, but at least I'm not lying to them. Well, I'm following the procedures. They know the procedures. Okay. And part of this also, I went to a training where I was at a center where their requirement was, you tell the parents that you did this and you share this. What are you doing? People are going to stop reporting. People will not, or many people will not report anymore if they feel like they can be confronted, because you have to share with the parents. So I call it my mantra. We don't share that information. If you have any questions, talk to my director.
I know when you first hire an employee, and sadly we have to hire a lot of employees in early childhood, right? 40% turnover rate annually. You get a boatload of information when you come in the door. This is one of many, many pieces that is covered in your orientation. What advice would you give on how to kind of keep this fresh, keep this current, refresh employees about these obligations, and kind of keep this at the forefront?
So depending on the state, depending on the program, I'm pretty sure many states follow this too, but as an example, federal program, the Head Start federal preschool, and also the federal birth to 5 program, Head Start, the requirement in the federal standards, the performance standards, annual training. It has to be part of you have to have annual training as required also in the standards, that you have to sort of bring people up to date, remind them of procedures in your organization, just in general, all of your procedures. But specifically, it singles out the child abuse reporting procedures. There must be an annual update. There must be an annual training on that. So I think for organizations where you may not be required by regulation, it's good practice. It's really actually best practice to make sure. And again, when I do my workshops, and it's you and me here, Andy, but when I do my workshops, they're as interactive as this. And I'm encouraging people, give me your scenarios, give me your cases. And I've had someone answering a phone and said, God, I just got a call from my center. I'm at this conference, but here's this question that came up, and answering and working with that person, if not with everybody in the room, at least talking to them after the workshop and working in real time. So, but when I train, it's very interactive because people are going to be afraid. We had an incident where there was potential, just a threat made to our staff. So once that threat was made to staff, number one, staff are not going to feel safe. All staff are not going to feel safe. Parents, they may not know about it, but so my practice in this case was, number one, I put out a letter to parents. The first thing I did was I put out a letter to parents. We've had this threat to a staff person. We're going to have an off-duty police officer you're going to see outside our door for the next 2 weeks. They're going to be armed, but they're going to have a yellow jacket on. It's going to say security on it. People will know. I said, but you as parents, you make the decision. We can assure you we're keeping this facility open and as safe as we can keep it. We're putting on extra security for that reason. And staff, similar letter, just so you know, yes, there's been a threat against this staff person, however, or a staff person. However, we've put these security procedures in place. If you feel uncomfortable about this, talk to us. This is more, it's still an employee relationship. It's different than a parent making an individual decision for their child. But again, because what happens if we hadn't told the parents, number one, why is there security? So, so communication, transparent communication is really a requirement,
Sure. So I want to sum things up, the little bullet points here for everybody. I think a big lesson, number one takeaway is know your state laws, right? All 50 states have mandatory reporting requirements. Get to know them, get familiar with them. Google search could probably get those pretty easily for you, I would think. Number two, I think you hit on some really good points about the actual role. We're not investigators, right? So your job is suspicion is enough to trigger these requirements. It's not, full documented evidence. You're not on CSI. You're not on some crime novel. You're not a detective. You're not anything like that. We don't expect you to be. But suspicion alone, I think Alan would say, is good to go and report. If you don't report, there can be consequences, right? These laws are in place for a reason. And gosh, you just think about some of the horrific things that have happened out there. I wouldn't want that burden on me, Alan. If I saw something that had some insights and I kept it quiet and I didn't share, and then something horrific happened to a child, I don't know what the rest of my life would look like, quite frankly. I mean, and then I think the ongoing importance of just, talking about some of these different scenarios, because they're not going to be as clear cut. Like, we all know if that child walks in with a black eye or covered head to toe in bruises or cigarette burns or whatever have you, that's a pretty darn clear cut case. But it's these more challenging, subtle things. And look, I got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. They say some crazy stuff sometimes, right? They live in the world of magical unicorns and Paw Patrol and everything else. So really kind of talking through different scenarios. If a kid says A, B, or C, does that meet the threshold? Would we report? How would we report? Who would report? Trying to figure that out in a way at your organization that is compliant with the law. But also, as Alan mentioned, gives your folks some cover so that nobody feels like they are betraying the trust or getting somebody in trouble or, doing anything that is inappropriate or not expected. So that frank discussion, I think, is helpful. Yes, sir, please.
I want to tag one thing on there, which you reminded me. This last reality of people in roles of mandated reporters, I've already shared a little bit of what I went through as a child, very little bit, not much. But, you've just got to understand and know that this area may be a very painful area. It could be for 25%. I haven't seen the research, but I'm going to guess at least 25% of your staff, of individuals in our lives, have been abused in some way, maybe not severely, but also there's got to be cases where there may have been sexually abused. And so we have to be mindful that what you just shared, Andy, at the end, having conversations, having discussion, making sure that you're open to talk to staff, that after you do a training, if you need to talk to me about something that I touched on here that could be a sensitive area for you, please speak to me or speak to, someone else who's an expert in this area. So I think we need to be mindful. So that's that last piece. We've got the fear piece, we've got the discretion piece. So this last piece. Every individual has their own lived experience. And I also wanted to say about like the laws and the different states with the laws. I think you've done some work with Childcare Aware. I believe they have a resource that you can just sort of search in on Childcare Aware. You can put in like the reporting laws, and I think they will have the laws for every state in their resources there, and it'll pull up the laws. And if they don't have the full law, at least it'll give you the citation and you'll know where to go if you need more information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, all good stuff. Well, Alan, if folks want to get a hold of you, if they want to get you for a training or a workshop, what's the best way to track you down?
That's probably, can I give my email?
Sure, whatever you'd like.
So it's Alan, Alan, and then M. This is all continuous. M as in Mark, Alan M, and then my last name, Guttman, Guttman. Alan M. Guttman at gmail.com. It's the best way to get me. And if you Google headstartconsultant.com, you'll come up with my website as well.
There we go. And I know you're traveling around quite a bit. You've got some conferences coming up, so we're looking forward to seeing you on the road. I think we'll be together in Virginia at some point in the near future, I believe.
At minimum at the conference coming up in the spring. But Andy, I want to thank you again. And again, I've always said this, that what we're doing here is we're connecting the dots. If people don't have the training, if people don't have the information, there are children that are not going to be protected. That's going to just fall through because someone didn't know that's what I was supposed to do. So I appreciate you sort of amplifying my voice, amplifying this topic as well to the community. Thank you so much, Andy.
Oh, well, thank you. And of course, thank you for everybody who's here with us today. We hope you appreciate, and hopefully this lesson was good for you, right? We like to talk about different topics and bring in experts, and we try to make it as fun and entertaining as we can. Obviously today we've got a tough topic, and I appreciate Alan's way he approaches it and his sensitivity towards it, because you're right. This could be a very triggering conversation for some people. So, please take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of those kiddos that are entrusted in your care, and please join us on the next episode of Early Childhood Chats. Until then, this is Andy saying thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.